Welcome to Title Experts University, our new home for our Thursday meetups. Listen, if you can hear me, if you can see me, drop a one in the chat. This is our new home, and it's our new way to get our learn on. I'm so excited and nervous at the same time. I am truly nervous and excited at the same time. We're trying to do something a little bit different. Also, we're trying to do something a little bit different, give you guys a different experience and how we come together. We wanted to build community by doing the Facebook group. We have an opportunity to communicate with you, to keep you updated, to answer questions after we come together on Thursdays, to do pop-ins, right? We're scheduled to come together on Thursdays at noon, but having this community, guys, will allow us to just do a quick pop in, answer any questions. You guys know I get emails, text messages, snail mail, pigeon, smoke signals of questions about title and closing and all these things. And it's always useful information. And you guys know my thought process is that if one has the question, the other probably has the question as well. And so this new platform that we have, this Facebook community, will allow me to pop in and just throw out a question that I got that'll probably help you. With that being said, again, welcome to Title Experts University. This is a long ways coming, guys. You guys know that I teach very often on the different topics concerning title, closings, purchase contracts, anatomy of a transaction, all things that are relevant to getting you to the closing table. And so this is a long ways coming. I'm very excited. I'm excited about the opportunity to bring you this information in a way that I believe is just palatable and easier for you to implement into your business for success. Our launch call today talking about hotspots in the purchase and sale contract. So this is an abbreviated review, obviously, of the purchase and sale contract. We're hitting the hotspots. What are some of the issues that are always where we get the most questions? Next week, if you are a member of the Realtor Association of the Palm Beaches, Greater Fort Lauderdale, Port St. Lucie, and all the other counties, I will be teaching that class with the board on Wednesday at noon. That's the 3-hour CE. So if you are a member, do sign up and we will do the 3-hour course there. But today, let's get into the hot spots. Listen, the chat is available for you. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in there. And we're going to get into the presentation. So please be patient with me because, again, this is our new way of administering this. So we're going to add our slides to the screen. All right. And I want to make sure that we're ready to roll. And I want to make sure of you guys, once again, if you can see our slides, give me another one in the chat. Make sure we can see. Make sure we can see our presentation. All right. That means we're good to go. I'm excited. I have maybe 2 more responsibilities, and then I can say we have success. So today's conversation is the Farber As Is Contracts Hotspot Review. Again, this is a high-level review of the areas of the contract where we get the most questions. For those who I have not had an opportunity to meet before, my name is Racole Jackson. I am the founder of Title Experts University, College of Closed and Funded. Yes. Like I needed another entity, but that is me. As it relates to my background, for those who know, I do bleed orange and blue. I attended the University of Florida for undergrad. Go Gators, where I got my associate's degree and my bachelor's degree and my associates, obviously. Undergraduate degrees in criminology with highest honors. I attended Santa Clara University School of Law, where I was the founder of the Real Estate Law Society. Came back home. I am a Miami girl, and attended the University of Florida School of Law and obtained my LLM in Real Property Development. I am licensed as a Florida Realtor. Got my first license in California. So with that being said, one of the things I want to tell you guys is funny to me that you should know is that we are when I had to review this contract, I had to review this contract for the first time just like you. I was I didn't write the contract, and I was an attorney when I first reviewed the contract. And again, if you guys are following me on social, I it looked like gobbledygook just like it did to you. It looked like gobbledygook. But the thing you should know is that the importance of it is important that you attend a contract class. Here's why: because you are guiding your customers through the process of creating a legally binding agreement. This is why this is important. And so after you get your license, one of the first classes you're going to take is the contract class. This is a binding agreement. And then beyond that, understanding that the enforceability of the contract is not going to change because an attorney was not involved, right? It's not going to change because an attorney was not involved in the contract preparation. And so it's important that you understand the provisions of the contract. So one of the first hot spots I want you guys to be sure that you understand is that you know that we have two forms of contract. We primarily use the FARBAR as is contract, but you know that there's another version called the contract for residential sale and purchase. The acronym is the CRISP. The CRISP. Understand that the as-is contract includes the seller's express disclaimer of warranty as to physical condition of the property. That's the first hot spot to understand. And so I often get the question and say, well, why would I use the CRISP over the FARBAR? The buyer, the seller is going to prefer the as-is because again, it's as is. I'm not giving you any warranty as to the condition of the property. Buyer, you need to conduct your due diligence and determine the condition of the property. I will tell you what I know, but it's up to you to do your inspections. And then we'll have a conversation about any improvements or repairs that need to be made to the property. So that's another point to understand. Even though you're using the FARBAR as is contract, you can later on make negotiations for repairs, right? Now, the CRISP has built-in provisions. And some of you may have even said, I've never even seen a CRISP before. The CRISP contract has built-in provisions requiring the seller to make repairs to the property. As a matter of fact, within that contract, there's a provision that says the seller will make repairs up to this amount. Again, for our purposes, we're discussing the FARBAR as is contract because that is what is most commonly used. 99.9% of the time, it is going to be the FARBAR as is contract that is utilized, right? So the first hotspot, you guys know that you can look at the footer of the contract to confirm the version of the contract that you are using. You know that in 2021, we started using a new version of the FARBAR as is contract, and we've been learning the changes to that contract. You want to be sure that you don't just receive a contract and assume that the cooperating realtor has used the version of the contract that you are now learning and committing to memory. So the first thing I do, even me as a closing attorney, whenever I receive a contract for review, I look at the bottom. I look at the footer of the contract to make sure that it is the version of the contract, the most recent version, because that's what we're using and that's what we know. If it's a different version, so be it. But I know that I need to go back and look at the sections of the contract that have changed, right? So again, make sure when you receive the contract that you're using the most, or you're using the version that you're familiar with. And I've had the question before, well, how would I get a hold of an older version of the contract? If you literally Google FARBAR as is contract, it will come up. You will see all the various versions of a FARBAR as is contract. And so that point is, the newest version is not the only version that's available for someone to get their hands on. So make sure you're going to look at the footer and make sure that you're reviewing the most recent version of the contract. All right. The next hotspot, you want to make sure that you deliver the riders along with the base contract. Some riders have cancellation provisions based on receipt of the rider. Which riders are those? The HOA rider for sure, the condo rider for sure. These riders, this is a hotspot. If you don't send this, if you don't ensure that this rider is delivered with the contract, when that rider is received, the buyer will have the right to cancel that contract. And this is beyond all the other cancellation provisions that you know that are within the base contract. Financing, inspection period, etc. Those riders have additional cancellation time periods in them. So you want to ensure that the riders are sent along with the contract to ensure that their cancellation time period is is ran along with the base contract, right? The next hotspot, blanks in the contract. Guys, there's no reason to leave a blank in the contract. You see here on the screen that if you look at your contract, if you look down the left side of your contract, each line is numbered. Each line that has an asterisk is indicating to you that there is a blank where information should either be selected or filled in, right? So let's look at, for example, line 26. If you go all the way to the right, there's a blank where the purchase price needs to be filled in. If you look at line 29, you go all the way into the right, you see that there is a box for you to make a selection. Throughout the entire contract, you want to make sure when you're completing the contract, I suggest when you finish preparing the contract, you then go back, run your eye down the left side of the contract, and anywhere that you see an asterisk, go into the body of the contract and make sure that the information is either filled in, an option is selected, or if it is not applicable, place an NA. There's no reason to leave blanks, guys. Guess what the result is when you leave a blank? Sometimes there's a default provision. Oftentimes, there you just don't have the term. So you know that there is a provision for a home warranty. There's no default there. It's just a blank. If you intended to provide the buyer with a home warranty, that information should go in there. If not, then you need to make sure that that is an NA. I can tell you a number of times I've seen the home warranty section filled in with an amount because the seller and unfortunately the listing agent also did not pay attention to it. They signed it. At closing, there was an amount for the home warranty. Well, guess what? It was left blank. The buyer filled it in with a number, right? So make sure you do not leave any blanks. There's no reason to leave a blank in the contract. Conflicting terms. When you're preparing the contract, you want to ensure that there are no conflicting terms. How does that happen, Racole? Number one, as you see on the screen, some sections have for you to be able to select one option or another. You don't select all three. Select one, right? That's an easy one. How about when you have a 21-day closing, but you left the financing term, the loan approval deadline blank, which gives the buyers 30 days to get loan approval. That's essentially a conflict. I'm closing in 21 days, but I'm giving you 30 days to get loan approval. Guess what that means? That means you've given the buyer the entire contract period to cancel on the basis of financing. So we violated a couple hotspots there, right? Which is on fire. Number one, we left that blank. We left the financing, the loan approval deadline blank. That should have been filled in. If you intend to give them 30 days, fill in 30 days. If you intend to give them 10 days, fill in 10 days. But then once your contract is completed, you want to make sure that these dates do not conflict, because a 21-day closing date definitely conflicts with a 30-day loan approval, right? So no conflicting terms. Select one option. What we see on the screen here is the option for who is selecting the closing agent. We know there's three options: 9C1, 9C2, 9C3. Believe it or not, I received a contract with all three selected. Right? The next hotspot, the parties. Now we're moving into the actual contract itself. The parties. Most times when realtors prepare the contract, you're going to go look at the property appraisers page, public records, to see who is indicated as the owner of the property. Who are the title holders? If you don't do that, understand that all owners, anyone who owns the property, they must execute the contract in order for the contract to be enforceable against them. So if John Doe and Jane don't own the property, John Doe, and they're both on title, John Doe is the only one listed as a seller, executes the contract with the buyer. Guess what? Jane Doe does not have to sell. She is not a party to that contract. She is not a party to that agreement to sell the property. So you always want to ensure the best information that you have available to you is obviously the property appraisers page. You're going to look at the vesting deed and look at who they have listed as the owner. That's the best information that's available to you at the time that you go under contract. Now, once you go to closing and the title agent runs a title exam, they're going to confirm for you who they show as owners of the property. And you'll get feedback saying, hey, I see John Doe is on the contract, but Jane Doe is also an owner who needs to participate in the sale of this property, right? Personal property. This is another hot spot. Know that if we look at paragraph D, the language specifically says, unless excluded, these items are included. This is a hot spot for two reasons. One, sometimes there is personal property that the seller does not intend to convey at closing. What does convey mean? That's another term. Convey means to sell. Convey means to transfer title or ownership to. Most time that's what? Ceiling, the light fixtures. If there's a chandelier. And so what do we need to do, guys? If the seller has fixtures, chandeliers, maybe it's an appliance that's included that they do not intend to be included in the sale, you need to make sure you strike through it in the contract, as well as show in subparagraph E that these items are excluded. To be triple careful, included in the MLS, right? Absolutely. Someone put ring in the chat. Guess what? Ring is now included as personal property that is going to be conveyed with sale. So if the seller does not intend to convey their ring system, then you need to make sure that it is excluded, right? Now, notice that from all the items that are listed, exactly, someone put microwave in the chat. From all the items that are listed, we still don't see washer and dryer. Microwave is assumed, but why would we assume? You're correct. Place microwave there as additional personal property to be conveyed. It doesn't hurt. One of the things that what we're always looking for when we draft a contract is clarity. It's clarity, right? It's clarity. Washer, dryer. I've even seen, guys, doors removed from property. So if you want to put decorative doors in personal property, be included. You want to describe the appliances. I've seen appliances changed out. At the time of contract, it was nice stainless steel washer, dryer, and then they went back and it was white Maytag. You cannot do that. You have to keep the same appliances in the property that were there when the parties went under contract. And that's something to understand too, guys. That's an important term to understand. Understand that the property needs to be in the same condition or better at closing as when the parties went under contract. What was existing at the property? What was the condition of the property when you went under contract? That's what the buyer is expecting when they close, right? Hotspot. Contract effective date. You have to know how to calculate and determine the effective date of the contract. This is important. You have to be clear on this because the effective date is the starting date for the calculation of time periods. We know that our escrow deposit, it may say within 3 days of the effective date. Loan approval is within 30 days of the effective date. Inspection period is within 15 days of the effective date. Well, if I'm not clear on what the effective date is, then my calculation in all those areas of the contract is going to be off, and it's going to be a problem. So what is our effective date? The contract specifically says at paragraph 3B, it says the effective date of the contract shall be the date when the last one of the buyer and seller has signed or initialed, right? If you're going back and forth with counteroffers, you generally initial changes, right? So when the last person either signs, and or initials changes and delivers the offer or final counter offer, that's your effective date. You must have both of those facts to create an effective date. It's signed and delivered. So if I receive an offer today on behalf of my seller, today is June 2nd. My seller executes accepts the offer, signs off on everything. I get busy, forget until tomorrow to send the executed offer back to the buyer's agent. My effective date is June 3rd. June 3rd. It is also not June 4th in the event the buyer's agent had a long day and slept through. It is the date that it is delivered, signed and delivered. This is important. So not just signed, but signed and delivered, and not necessarily received, because again, I don't have control over when you open your email and receive it. Now, obviously, any good agent is going to make a phone call and confirm that the fully executed contract has been received, right? But in the event that you don't, in the event that you do not, in the event that you do not call on June 3rd and you don't call until June 4th, it does not change the fact that the effective date is June 3rd. Great question. Which day is day zero? The effective date is day zero. What does that question mean? That means when you start counting, the effective date is not day one. We said that our effective date is June 3rd. That is day zero. June 4th is day one. Very good question. Pro agent tip. You always want to confirm the effective date of the contract in your initial email, right? Upon delivery or receipt. So we're all excited. I send over the fully executed contract, right? And that's another term for you guys. You don't have a contract until both parties have signed. Up until then, you have an offer. You have an offer. The document itself is a contract template, but you guys are negotiating, you're making offers. You don't have a fully executed contract until both parties sign. We're some experts now. You guys will sound very sophisticated, right? Right? You're making offers. You're making offers back and forth, right? And so another sophisticated agent tip will say, when you receive that fully executed contract back from me, if I'm too busy and I just shoot it off and say, hey, here you go, you should say, wonderful, Racole, confirming receipt of your contract. Our effective date is June 3rd. If I'm too busy and I'm not as sophisticated and professional enough to send that information out, one of you should confirm the effective date, because we're all excited now because we're under contract for this $8 million deal. But then we get down the road and everybody's, the honeymoon phase is over and we're fighting over the inspection period deadline. That effective date is what's going to matter, right? So always confirm your effective date. That is a hot spot. Know what your effective date is. Always confirm your effective date. Here's a hot spot that's probably not so apparent. Closing date. I often see on or before. Do not do that. Do not place on or before language in your closing date. Guess what you said? Let's be literal. You said that you're willing to close on or before June 2nd. Well, who's determining the on or before? And what if you're ready June 1st, but I'm not? What if I'm ready May 31st? That's before, right? So what am I saying? I'm saying that this language, what we talked about when we first started, was we're seeking clarity. This language makes it unclear when we're closing. Now this is grounds for dispute, because I'm ready. You said on them before, and don't think your clients are going to help you with this. Don't think your client's going to help you with this. They're going to say, well, the seller say, excuse me, my beach house isn't ready yet. I said I was moving on June 2nd. And then the buyer's agent gonna come back, well, it says on or before. And the seller's gonna say, well, listen, I didn't even pay attention to that. I don't even know what that means. You put that in there. I'll be ready on June 2nd. See you later on not May 31st. You can always agree to close sooner, later. Guys, place just a date. Yep, place just a date. I know that there's brokers that they are completely opposed to their agents putting that language in their closing date because they've had issue with it. And one thing I'll say about that, when you guys see these standard templates for the contract, and you say, why is all this in here? Short answer, something happened. There was a dispute, lawsuit, something came about that the Florida Bar and Florida Realtors determined that clarity was needed and language was needed to specifically address that issue. So now we have 12 pages, right? If something else arises, our most recent revisions to the contract was because of clarity, right? When we call the Florida Bar so many times in a particular section of the contract, they're saying, hey, this needs to be resolved because this is not clear, right? So clarity is what we're always seeking. Do not use on or before. That's a potential issue. Hotspot. Tenant occupancy and possession. Guys, if you know that there is a tenant in the property, follow the protocol. You need to deliver to your buyer a copy of leases within 5 days after the contract effective date. That's what the contract provides for. The seller is required to provide the buyer with a copy of the leases within 5 days after the contract effective date. The buyer then needs to review those leases and cancel the contract if they're not in agreement with the terms of those leases. And they have to notify the seller in writing within 5 days after receipt of the leases. I can't tell you how many times, guys, we've gotten to closing because paragraph 6 was not checked off. We've gotten to closing and then someone said, oh, there's tenants in the property. Well, guess what else has to happen when there's tenants in the property? We need to put some money on the settlement statement, right? The buyer is entitled to a credit for any security deposit that has been paid to the seller by these tenants. Guys, understand that your buyer, when the tenant moves out, your buyer is now obligated to return to the tenant their security deposit. What happens if they weren't credited that from the seller and the seller's long gone? So you want to make sure you know for sure when you go on a contract or lease, you should know you've done a walkthrough, whether there's any tenants in the property. If there are tenants in the property, make sure that paragraph 6 is selected. Make sure that your buyer gets a copy of those leases to confirm what they're agreeing to, because guess what? They now have to step into the shoes of the seller and abide by the terms of the leases that are in place as of their purchase of the property. So if they don't agree to it, right? So let's say the lease says that the tenants get, the landlord pays the water, lights, gas, and gives them groceries every month. Excuse me? I am not doing that. Cancel, right? But if you purchase it and you keep going, guess what? The next day, you need to be providing water, gas, electric, and a nice couple bags of groceries from Whole Foods at that, right? So listen, it's your responsibility. So outside of the leases, so that your buyer can review those and confirm what they are agreeing to, you want to make sure that you have an estoppel. An estoppel letter is when the tenants, along with the landlord slash seller, confirms the amount of security deposit that has been paid, the monthly rental amount, is anyone in default, right? So that the tenants are now also bound to the financial accounting that was relied upon at closing. So the tenant can't say, oh, I actually gave him $10,000 security deposit. And it says, well, the estoppel that you signed said you only gave 5. Hotspot. This is very important, right? Financing. Now, this is a blazing section of the contract, right? And we made a lot of changes to the contract recently in this financing section. This is one of the sections of the contract that always changes, right? So the first type of in the financing section, the first option for the method in which the buyer is going to pay the purchase price is cash. Cash. So technically, this is not finance, right? There's no financing contingency. There's no loan involved. Understand that the buyer, this is a hot spot to understand. The buyer who has made an offer and gone under contract to purchase the property for cash may still seek to obtain financing. Guys, do not go to World War IV, 3 and 4, when you find out that the buyer has sought financing. They have that right. Now, the buyer cannot then avail themselves of the protections that the contract provides for a buyer who went under contract for financing. What does that mean? If they're not approved for the loan, they can't cancel the contract and get their deposit back. You said that you were purchasing cash. Now, I've gotten the question before, can we agree that the buyer cannot seek financing? Absolutely. Absolutely. You can add that as an additional term. The buyer will not seek financing for the purchase of this contract. I'm sorry, property. The buyer will not seek financing. If you would like to, place that in the additional terms. Buyer will not seek financing. Does that give you more certainty of the transaction proceeding and not falling out if they don't get their financing? Yes. But it's the buyer's still locked in anyway. If they say they're purchasing cash, they can't just cancel that. That escrow deposit is still on the line, right? So you're gonna have the option to seek the escrow deposit, but again, right now the contract does not prohibit the buyer from seeking financing in the event that they agree to purchase cash, right? Now, hotspot. No matter how many times this is said, believe it or not, it's still missed. If the buyer has not received loan approval by the loan approval deadline, please get an extension of the loan approval deadline. Or if the seller will not agree and the buyer is not sure that they'll be able to get the financing, notwithstanding the fact that they didn't meet the deadline, cancel the contract. If you go past the loan approval deadline and the buyer is not approved for a loan, your escrow deposit is now at risk. And the reason why I say at risk, seller may be generous and release it. They may take a portion of it. But what we do know for sure is you are in default. You are in default. So it's best for you to, if you have we talked about utilizing transaction coordinators. If you have a transaction coordinator, your transaction coordinator better tie that deadline to the tables of her heart, right? And you too, that you do not miss it. This is important because this is generally your last out, right? We're going to talk about the inspection period. The inspection period is generally your first out. The loan approval deadline is generally your last, no point of return. And there's no flexibility in this, guys. No flexibility in this unless the seller is lenient. The reason why I want to be clear that there's no flexibility in this contract has been revised to make it clear that the loan approval now includes the requirement that the property appraisal be completed during this time period. Our old version of the contract was not explicit. This is explicitly in the contract now, that your property appraisal must be completed during the loan approval period. If it is not completed, are you technically have you defaulted? Technically, yes. However, what is most apparent, what the Florida Bar and Florida Realtors is preventing by changing this language is there was essentially a loophole in our older version of the contract that allow cancellation of the contract for property conditions. And an appraisal, arguably, is a property condition. Property does not appraise. And so that loophole was there. That loophole is no longer there. Lenders have, for the most part, gotten on track, and they are now able to get appraisers lined up to get your appraisals done within the loan approval deadline or time period. But know that you can no longer push back and say, oh, they didn't get their appraisal done, and now we found out the property hasn't appraised. It has to be done during the loan approval period. Hotspot, loan application. Guys, your buyer cannot intentionally not comply with the loan application requirements to get a denial, to use that as a reason to be denied for financing. It doesn't happen all the time, but it has happened. I've had a closing where the buyer clearly intentionally did not use, as the contract says, good faith and due diligence in completing the requirements for the loan approval, and they were found in default. Right? You have to make diligent efforts. You cannot just not make the loan application, right? Or not respond to the lender. So know that. Loan approval notice to the seller. This is largely unknown, I think I should say. So here's some information that is in the contract that I want to make sure you guys are clear on. And I've highlighted the areas from the financing portion of the contract. So number one, at line 106, it says the buyer shall, upon written request, keep the seller and broker fully informed about the status of buyer's mortgage loan application, loan processing, appraisal, and loan approval, including property-related conditions of loan approval. Buyer authorizes buyer's mortgage broker, lender, and closing agent to disclose such and progress and release preliminary and finally executed closing disclosures and settlement statements as appropriate and allowed to seller and the broker. What is that saying? Guys, if the seller, upon written request, and some agents are including this in the additional terms of their contract, they'll say pursuant to, I think that's 9C3, but definitely line 106 of the contract, seller hereby requests that the buyer keeps seller and broker fully informed of the status of the buyer's mortgage loan application, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That means full transparency, right? So that's something that you should know, full transparency. No longer are you saying, well, that's not their business. Guess what? The contract says that if the seller requests it, the buyer must do that, right? Subparagraph 3. If within the loan approval period, buyer obtains loan approval, buyer shall notify the seller in writing prior to the expiration of the loan approval period. Did you guys know that? You're supposed to send notice to the seller in writing of your loan approval. And if you are unable to obtain loan approval within the loan approval period, but you are satisfied, meaning you believe that you're going to be able to get loan approval before closing, the buyer shall also deliver written notice to the seller confirming the same prior to the expiration of the loan approval period. There's a lot of notice now in this financing section. So you're supposed to give notice, written notice, prior to the loan approval deadline, either that you've been approved or you haven't, but you're okay. You have the best loan officer in the world. They're going to get it done, right? If the buyer is unable to obtain loan approval within the loan approval period or cannot timely meet the loan approval period after exercise of good faith, then the buyer can terminate the contract, right? And be refunded their deposit. That's what we've always known. If you do everything you're supposed to do to get an approval and you're not able to be approved, then you can get your deposit back and you give notice prior to the loan approval deadline, right? Here's a funny one. If the buyer, moving to line 120, if buyer fails to timely deliver any written notice provided for in paragraph 8B, so you haven't given any notice prior to expiration of the loan approval period, then you're going to proceed as if you are getting cash. That's what this language says. So you cannot avail yourself of the financing contingency and cancel, right? If you fail to give notice, then you cannot cancel later on and say, well, pursuant to the financing contingency, I need to cancel. No, no, no. You should have done that prior to the loan approval period. But here's what's missed. It goes on in line 122 to say, provided, however, the seller may elect to terminate the contract by delivering written notice of termination to the buyer within 3 days after expiration of the loan approval period, and provided the buyer is not in breach of the default of the terms of the contract, buyer will be refunded their deposit, thereby releasing buyer and seller from the contract. What does that mean? That means market is cooling now, but in a hot market, when the seller was saying, hold on, my property has increased $30,000 in value. I want out of this contract. I want out of this contract. I want out of this contract. Guys, believe it or not, it happens. Sellers were wanting out of their contract to go on to the next offer for whatever amount more. I'm saying 30,000 or whatever the amount more. The contract specifically provides if the buyer did not give notice within 3 days of the loan approval deadline, which way they were going. They were approved, they were not, they weren't sure, but I'm staying in. Then the seller can unilaterally cancel, give you your deposit back, and let me go into contract for $30,000 more. Did y'all know that was in there? Give your notice. If you're representing a buyer, give appropriate notice. Give appropriate notice. All right. That was a lot. We could do a conversation on financing all by itself. Now, who's paying for what? This is not necessarily a hot spot. This is just something that's sometimes unclear. This doesn't change. Just want to be sure that you guys are clear on who's paying for what. So this is a quick table on 9C1. If 9C1 is selected, I'm going to move back to this. So we're looking at who's paying for, who's selecting a title agent and paying for what. So we have 9C1, 9C2, and 9C3. We know that 9C1 is seller designating the closing agent. 9C3 is buyer designating the closing agent. 9C3, I said 9C2, 9C3 is the Miami-Dade Broward Regional Provision, right? So here's what that looks like, where the closing costs are allocated based on which paragraph is selected, right? That's 9C1, that's 9C2, and that's 9C3. Not really a hot spot. It's just important that you guys understand this. So I'm going to roll back 2 slides and for clarity, give you this quick point. As between the 3 options, there are 3 costs primarily that's moving around. Number 1 is the owner's title policy, which is the policy given to the buyer. Number 2, the title search, which is the cost of the search that is ordered in order to prepare a title commitment. And number 3 is the municipal lien search, which is a search that is ordered to determine permits, water bills, etc. Those 3 costs are the costs that move around based on which item is selected. So on 9C1, all 3 of those costs and the others are on the seller side. Under 9C2, those 3 costs are on the buyer side. All 3 have moved over to the buyer side. And under 9C3, we call it split the baby. The title search and the lien search are on the seller side. The owner's policy is on the buyer side. Clarity. That's all you're doing with 9C1, 9C2, and 9C3. And obviously, who's selecting the closing agent is also changed based on which one you select. But that's for you to know, quick cheat sheet for where you should see these closing costs on your settlement statement. Right? Hotspot, property maintenance condition. Got this question. Again, going back to our conversation at the beginning. Property maintenance, and this is in the contract. Guys, except for normal wear and tear, the seller is required to maintain the property in the same condition from the effective date. What does that mean? You cannot let the property, it's all nicely manicured blue pool. Once we get to closing, it looks like Jurassic Park and the pool is black. Can't do that. You cannot do that. You have to maintain the property in the same condition that it was from the effective date. This language is in the contract. What happens if the seller does not? The contract provides for an amount to be withheld at closing, either until it's brought to its contract effective date condition, or the buyer needs to be credited, right? That is in the contract. So if you go to the property and the property just completely disheveled, and what happened? Guess what? There's a provision that allows for the buyer for funds to be collected from the seller to get that property back in its condition. Inspection period. No matter how many times we talk about this, the buyer has the unilateral right to cancel the contract at any time and for any reason during the inspection period. Anytime and for any reason. They wake up, they have a headache, they don't want to be bothered. They can cancel. They're into the zodiac and they say Mercury is rising. They want to cancel. They can cancel. I get the question, are you sure? I'm positive. Well, what if they can cancel for absolutely any reason whatsoever during the inspection period? Right? So we got a question. If it is an as-is contract, does that prevent the buyer from doing a walkthrough if tenants live there? A realtor said to prevent a walkthrough before close. That is absolutely incorrect. I feel like Jeopardy. That is absolutely incorrect. No. The buyer is absolutely able to perform a walkthrough at their scheduled time prior to closing. And that language is in the contract. It's under your walkthrough provision. It's a very good question. You want to ensure that any agreements made during the inspection period regarding the condition of the property is in writing. And if it's the condition of the property, I would say if it's the condition of the property that's significant, and if the repair is not made just so, then you might want to extend the inspection period. Again, we're in a different market. It's kind of still a seller's market. Seller may push back, but you should either, if it's a significant issue, increase the inspection period. Because again, if you all agree to a repair being made, and again, that repair needs to be made just so, I sometimes describe it as the repair being subjective. So let's say, for example, it's pool tile, and the pool tile needs to be, it's a little dingy or something, and it's replaced. To me, that's subjective. And the buyer, you're beyond your inspection period, and you're saying, well, this color still looks bad. Guess what? You're going with this color because we're outside of the inspection period, and that's it. No one ever said that you could still cancel if the next color was not to your liking, right? And so the next point I'll make in regards to that, if it's a subjective repair, just give a credit. Don't get into, making subjective repairs. She said, people listening. All right. Open permits versus code violation. Hot spot. You guys should know this by now. Seller is not obligated. Current version of the contract, seller is not obligated to close out open permits. The seller must only cooperate with the buyer's efforts to resolve open permits. Seller must only cooperate, but they're not responsible for closing out open permits, right? Pro agent tip. Add the additional language in the contract that the seller will be responsible for closing out all open permits and code violations at their expense prior to closing. Most brokerages have this as default language in their contract template, that the seller will be responsible for closing out all open permits at their expense prior to closing. Now, code violations is included in there gratuitously because code violations, you cannot proceed to closing. Code violations are title issues. The closing agent should not close your transaction with code violations. Open permits are not title issues. This is why this is important. So neither the closing agent will require that an open permit be closed out, neither does the contract. So if this is important to your buyer, that all open permits be addressed at closing, you need to ensure that the language is in there. And if the language is in there, then your closing agent should not, I won't say they will not, because all closing agents are not title experts. They will not close with the open permits. Question: if the buyer waives the right to inspection, can they come back and change their mind? They can change their mind, but the contract does not have to change. They can regret that they agreed to proceed without an inspection, but the seller does not have to be lenient. That's a very good question. In this environment of waiving inspection periods, waiving appraisals, waiving your firstborn child, be careful. Be careful, because what you agree to, you have to abide by. All right, very good question. The standards and definitions section, and this is going to round us out. This is going to round us out. I need you guys to take a deep breath and understand this. Time. This is another blazing hot section. Number one, line 432. When someone says, is it calendar days or business days? We're in the far bar as is. Far bar as is says calendar days. Line 432, calendar days based on where the property is located shall be used in computing time periods. Calendar days. It does not revert to business days and then back to calendar. It is calendar days throughout the entire contract for your calculation of time periods. What does that mean? That means that when you're calculating a time period, that you count every day, that you don't jump over or skip any day because it's a holiday or a business day. That is relevant to a different measure as it relates to time. That's relevant to the deadline. But as far as counting days to get to the deadline, do not skip days. There's no reason for that. Count every day. Remember, we talked about from the beginning, the effective date is day 0. After then, you're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, so on and so forth. Do not skip a day because it's a holiday. Do not skip a day because it's a Saturday or Sunday. Count every day in that period. Now, when you land on your deadline, other than the time for acceptance and the effective date, those are 2 deadlines. The time for acceptance, that's in paragraph 3 of page 1. The effective date is in paragraph 3 of page 1. Other than those 2 dates, every other date that falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, national legal public holiday, not your own personal holiday, not your birthday. And we have the code there for what that standard is. Every other date that falls on a Saturday, every other deadline that falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday rolls forward to the next business day. That's where business days comes in. If your deadline, other than the effective date and time for acceptance, falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, that date, that deadline is going to roll forward to the next business day, 11:59. Notice we've removed 5 p.m. from the contract. It used to say 5 p.m. Now it's 11:59. The deadline is 11:59, right? Right? So what does that mean? Inspection period, deadline. If it's on a Saturday, it's rolling forward to the Monday if the Monday's not a holiday. Escrow deposit deadline. If it falls on a Sunday, it's rolling forward to Monday if Monday's not a holiday. Loan approval. If it falls on a Sunday, it's rolling forward to the Monday if Monday's not a holiday. The effective date. I get a contract, I get an offer June 3rd, send it over to my buyer. We're both vegan. We don't care nothing about your July 4th hot dogs. My seller executes the contract, accepts the offer. We now have a fully executed contract. I deliver it I send it back to you on July 4th because again, I'm vegan. I don't do hot dogs. July 4th means nothing to me. Guess what my effective date is? July 4th. The contract clearly says the effective date does not change. The other dates roll forward. All right. So we got a quick question. Are you saying that per the contract, once you waive your right as buyer for inspection, you can change your mind? I'm guessing if the seller says it's okay or gives you the yes, is it absolutely? That is correct. If you decide that you would like to have an opportunity to inspect the property and the seller agrees to allow that, then you can proceed. But if the seller says absolutely not, we're under contract for no inspection period, you get no inspection period. That's what you agreed to. All right? Time. Make sure, guys, that you are clear on time. Effective date is day 0. Calendar days are used to calculate the time period as it relates to your deadline, unless it's the acceptance date or the effective date. Every other date rolls forward. If it falls on a Saturday or Sunday or holiday, every other deadline is going to roll forward to the next business day, 11:59 p.m. You guys should have that memorized by now, right? You're welcome. All right. There you go. I've said this 3 times already. Other than time for acceptance and the effective date, any time periods provided for a date specified in the contract that end or occur on Saturday, Sunday, or national legal holiday shall extend to 11:59 where the property is located. That's important too. Not 11:59 in California. And the property's here in Florida. Houston, we have a problem because 11:59 in California is 2:59 a.m. the next day. Be careful. All right. Time is blazing. Last hot spot, agent compensation. Guys, do not, no, 11:59, not 5 p.m. on a weekday, 11:59. Let me go back. 11:59. 5 p.m. used to be in our contract. That's gone. Now there is no time whatsoever. They say that day. At what time does that day end? That day ends at 11:59 p.m. It used to say 5 p.m. That's a good question. All right. So the last hot spot when you guys try and duke it out, agent compensation. Guys, you cannot change your compensation by putting 7% in this section of the contract. I'm sorry. Okay, I shouldn't laugh because I get it. I was a realtor first. Line 613, this contract shall not modify any MLS or other offer of compensation made by seller or listing broker to cooperating brokers. This contract shall not modify, mean change, any MLS or other offer of compensation made by seller or listing broker to cooperating brokers. You cannot change it by putting 10% next to your name in this section of the contract. You are going to get what is indicated in the MLS. And then if you get a real stickler, line 613, go in a little bit. It says this contract shall not modify any MLS or other offer of compensation made by seller or listing broker to cooperating brokers. If you get a real stickler, you get one of your realtor colleagues that sits on the ethics board, they're going to blast you and say that doesn't even have a place in the contract. You should never put your compensation on the contract. But I'll just stop by saying it is not going to change your offer of compensation. All right. All right. Listen, you got to continue to take contract classes. These issues, you're going to get different issues. You're going to see different issues. Some things are going to become more clearer to you as you run into issues and as you take more classes. Some of the attorneys, they have run into different issues than the others. So they're going to lean in the areas where they have either litigated or provided counsel. So continue to take classes, continue to learn your contract. Your contract should be second nature to you guys at this point. The contract doesn't change. It should be second nature to you at some point. When you're first starting, you're having to learn all the pages. But at some point, the sections that you know are hot spots, like we're discussing today, should be able to just rattle them off in your sleep, right? Questions. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. I'm glad that you guys enjoyed it. Any questions? We are right on 1 o'clock. Look at that. We are right at 1 o'clock. I'm glad that you enjoyed. Yes, we can go over commercial contracts. Let me write that down. That was my first. I did Marcus and Millichap first. Marcus and Millichap, Cushman and Wakefield. Started off. Notice of commencement. The seller will have to terminate it. Yes, that's a good question. That's a good question. Notice of commencement is a title issue that must be resolved prior to closing. Yep. All right, guys. All right, awesome. So listen, I am very happy with all the feedback that you guys are providing. Listen, because we now have this community, all of these suggestions that you have for classes that you want to take, how we can make our presentations. I see comments regarding Zoom. We'll get on that and look at that for sure. I'm a Zoom person as well. So we'll see how we can incorporate Zoom. Right now, we're streaming live on YouTube as well as Facebook. We'll see how we can include Zoom in that stream option. But again, within the Facebook community, guys, post your questions. Myself, my team, we're in there. So post your questions. We'll answer your questions, as well as they will give us an opportunity to plan the class on that topic. All right. Question was, what happens at closing with open permits? With open permits, if the contract does not require the seller to close them out, then with our office, you'll sign a disclosure that you are aware that there's open permits, but we'll still close because that's not a title issue. Now, I appreciate you guys as well. I appreciate your feedback. I appreciate you attending, and I appreciate you guys just doing a good job as realtors. Right? It makes us all look good. Honestly, it makes us all look good. When one of us does good, it makes us all look good. So make sure that you guys, again, if you're on, then you're in the Facebook group. If you're on YouTube, jump on, go on to Facebook, join the group, ask your questions, post comments, suggestions, and if that is all, we will see you next week. You're welcome. You're welcome. Go get some contracts, guys, and I will see you at the closing table. Bye.